On a stormy night, David Carter offers a ride to a mysterious woman stranded in the rain. By morning, a military helicopter hovers over his home, agents demanding answers. What begins as an act of kindness spirals into a deadly conspiracy, forcing an ordinary man into a fight for truth, survival, and his own identity. Welcome to Snap Stories. Let's get started. David Carter was the kind of man people barely noticed. In his mid-30s, with soft features weathered by quiet disappointments, he led a life defined by routine and caution. For the past 8 years, he had worked as a night shift security guard at a remote warehouse on the outskirts of town, a job that required little conversation and even less ambition. The hours were long, the nights silent, and David preferred it that way. Or so he told himself. His home sat on the edge of a sleepy countryside, a modest single-story house inherited from his late uncle. It was the kind of place where the mail rarely arrived on time, the neighbors kept to themselves, and the closest grocery store was a 20-minute drive. After his divorce 2 years earlier, David had found himself retreating further from the world. The echoes of old arguments still seemed to linger in the walls, and the occasional, almost automatic messages from former friends had long dried up. Despite his outward detachment, David carried within him a restless, unspoken ache, a quiet yearning for something more. He often found himself staring at the night sky during his patrol rounds, wondering if there wasn't something else waiting beyond the dull cycle of shifts, bills, and empty weekends. It wasn't adventure he sought exactly, but meaning, proof that his life could still matter in a way no one, including himself, had ever believed. A cautious man by nature, David followed rules, avoided conflict, and lived well within the safety lines of habit. Yet buried beneath his guarded exterior was a flicker of rebellion, a hunger for one moment of consequence. He read books about people who made impossible choices, about ordinary souls drawn into extraordinary circumstances, always from a safe distance, always certain such stories belonged to other lives. His social circle had dwindled to the occasional nod at a gas station or a brief conversation with a store clerk. Loneliness had become a quiet companion, one that spoke louder in the silence of empty rooms. And though David would never admit it, part of him longed for a reason to break from the numbness, to matter, to be needed. He just didn't know yet how far fate would push him to find it. The rain had only grown heavier by the time David pulled the car to a stop at a narrow, unmarked country lane. The road ahead was swallowed by darkness, flanked by looming trees that seemed to lean inward, obscuring what little light the storm clouds allowed. The woman in the passenger seat, still soaked from the rain, turned to him with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying an odd finality, like someone saying goodbye before an inevitable storm. Before David could ask if she was sure this was her stop, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain, vanishing quickly into the shadows beyond the lane's entrance. A chill passed through him, not from the cold, but from something heavier, something instinctive. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, debating whether to call after her. But he didn't. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Just another strange night in a string of strange, forgettable nights. It wasn't until he reached home, hours later, that he noticed it. A small pendant lying on the passenger seat. Simple, silver, and unfamiliar. It felt strangely warm in his palm. David's stomach tightened. He considered tossing it out the window, but fatigue and rationalization won out. It was just a necklace. He set it on the kitchen table and went to bed. By dawn, the sound of approaching blades shattered the countryside's usual stillness. David rushed outside as a military-style helicopter hovered low above his yard, wind and debris whipping in every direction. Moments later, black-clad men descended from ropes, their faces hard and unreadable. "David Carter?" One of them barked, approaching with rigid purpose. He barely managed to nod before they pushed past him, demanding to know about the woman from the night before. Who was she? What did she say? Did she leave anything behind? The questions came sharp, urgent, carrying a weight of consequences David couldn't yet grasp. They claimed she was a highly wanted individual, dangerous, her mere presence a risk to national security. The words felt unreal, a language and the kind of news stories David never imagined touching his quiet, anonymous life. And in that moment, as he watched them ransack his home and interrogate him under the beating blades of the helicopter. David Carter realized his life had irreversibly shifted. Whatever this was, there was no going back. The agents wasted no time tearing through David's modest home. Cupboards were emptied, floorboards pried up, drawers dumped onto the floor. Their movements were sharp and practiced, their faces devoid of anything resembling empathy. David sat stiffly on the couch, a dozen different questions crashing through his mind, none of them with answers. He repeated the same story to every agent that questioned him. He'd picked up a stranded woman in the rain, dropped her off at a country lane, and that was it. He didn't know her name, hadn't asked, and hadn't seen her since. The lead agent, a broad-shouldered man with cold, colorless eyes, didn't look convinced. "You should have left her there," the man muttered before motioning for his team to pull out. "If she contacts you again, for your sake, don't be a hero." And with that, they were gone. The helicopter lifted off, leaving behind the battered remains of David's privacy and a gnawing sense of unreality. In the heavy silence that followed, David's eyes landed on the kitchen table. The pendant was still there. The agents hadn't taken it, hadn't even noticed it. A sick, sinking feeling settled in his chest. She left it on purpose. For the next 2 days, strange things began to happen. A white van with dark-tinted windows parked down the road from his house. He received phone calls where no one spoke on the other end. A figure lurked at the edge of the woods bordering his property at night, disappearing when David turned on the porch light. His co-workers at the warehouse, already distant acquaintances, grew colder. Conversation stopped when he entered the room. A friend from town, someone he occasionally grabbed a drink with, suddenly claimed to be too busy to meet. Even his nearest neighbor avoided his gaze, pulling his children indoors when David passed by. Fear bloomed into paranoia. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little longer. Every knock at the door made his pulse spike. Desperate to rid himself of the pendant, David drove to a secluded bridge and hurled it into the rushing river below. He felt a momentary relief watching it vanish into the current. But that night when he returned home, it was sitting on his kitchen table, dry, gleaming in the dim light. Sleep abandoned him entirely. The lines between fear and reality blurred. He knew now this wasn't coincidence. Driven by equal parts dread and compulsion, David examined the pendant more closely. It felt heavier than it should, and with trembling hands, he pried it open. Inside was a microchip, no larger than a grain of rice, tucked behind a false panel. Alongside it, etched into the metal, was a series of numbers and letters, a code he didn't recognize. His first instinct was to turn it over to the authorities, to rid himself of the nightmare. But something stopped him. A stubborn sliver of curiosity, or perhaps the long-buried hunger for meaning, rooted him in place. Before he could decide, a message appeared on his old laptop. The screen flickered into life on its own. A plain text window opened. "If you want to live, don't trust them. Meet me, 11 p.m., the old water tower." No name, no explanation, just a promise of answers. Against every sensible instinct he possessed, David went. He needed to know why this was happening, who the woman was, why the agents were chasing her, what the pendant meant. The figure who met him at the abandoned water tower kept their face hidden under a hood. A voice distorted through a small device confirmed David's fears. The woman he picked up wasn't an ordinary fugitive. She'd been carrying evidence of a government conspiracy, buried deep in encrypted files. The pendant's microchip contained classified data capable of toppling powerful people. "You've stumbled into a war you didn't choose," the voice told him. "But now you're in it." David's head spun. He didn't want this. He wasn't a fighter or a hero. He was a man who kept to himself, followed the rules, and asked for nothing from the world. And yet, here he was, surrounded by shadows, hunting for secrets he didn't understand. The ally warned him that the agents wouldn't stop until the pendant and anyone connected to it were silenced. Trust no one. Stay off the grid. And most importantly, decide if he wanted to run or expose the truth. David's old life was gone. The safety of routine replaced by paranoia and uncertainty. Every glance over his shoulder, every unfamiliar car, every unexplained sound in the night set his nerves on edge. The world had become a maze of threats, and he was no longer sure if escape was even possible. One thing, however, was certain. Whatever lay ahead, David could no longer pretend to be invisible. The decision came in a moment of clarity. David Carter, a man who had spent his entire life avoiding conflict and consequence, could no longer run. The lines between survival and meaning had blurred, and whatever nightmare he was tangled in wouldn't end by hiding. He agreed to meet the mysterious ally one final time. They chose an abandoned rail yard miles outside town, rusted tracks, crumbling warehouses, and the suffocating scent of damp earth and old metal. The darkness hung thick, pierced only by flickering light from a makeshift terminal the ally had set up inside a derelict cargo container. David clutched the pendant tight as he approached, nerves alight. The ally, face still hidden by a hood, worked quickly at a laptop connected to an ominous array of cobbled-together equipment. "You need to decide now," the ally urged, voice tense. "We upload this. You'll never have a normal life again." Before David could answer, a figure stepped from the shadows. Someone David recognized. It was one of the warehouse supervisors from his night shift job, a man he'd shared coffee with countless times. "Sorry, Dave," the man said, raising a silenced pistol. "It's bigger than you." It was a double cross. Within seconds, the darkness erupted with gunfire. Black-clad agents swarmed the yard, and flashes of muzzle fire lit the crumbling structures. The rogue ally fired back, providing cover as David sprinted into the maze of rusting cargo containers and derelict machinery. Adrenaline drowned out fear. David weaved through the shadows, bullets shredding the air around him. He dove through broken windows, crawled under collapsing platforms, every instinct screaming at him to survive. Chased deep into the adjacent woods, David used every ounce of instinct he never knew he possessed, doubling back, hiding in undergrowth, moving without sound. The terrain became a weapon in his hands, disorienting his pursuers in the chaotic dark. But there was no escape forever. Cornered at the edge of an abandoned industrial substation, David found himself trapped, agents closing in, weapons raised. And yet, amid the chaos, his gaze landed on a half-crushed relay box near an old control panel. The Allies' equipment bag lay nearby, left behind in the scramble. Desperation sharpened into resolve. David yanked open the pendant, removed the microchip, and jammed it into the data port of the hacked laptop. The screen flared to life, a cascade of files and classified images scrolling across it. Evidence of high-level corruption, secret operations, and sanctioned assassinations. He hesitated for a heartbeat, his entire existence balanced on a single keystroke. Then he hit send. The files broadcast through unsecured channels, uploading to news outlets, whistleblower networks, and mirror cloud servers. David felt the weight of terror and exhilaration collide in his chest. Even as gunfire cracked the night, he knew the truth was out. A burst of static came through the laptop speaker as one final message appeared. Transmission complete. In that moment, David Carter was no longer invisible. And no matter what happened next, the world would finally see what had been hidden for too long. The aftermath came quickly, though not in the way David expected. Within hours of the data dump, major news outlets buzzed with cryptic headlines. Anonymous leak sparks allegations. Unverified files circulating online. Government dismisses conspiracy claims. The authorities denied everything, labeling the leak a hoax, the product of malicious foreign interference. Official channels scrubbed the images and files as fast as they appeared. But in the spaces beyond the mainstream, encrypted forums, pirate news feeds, back-alley message boards, David Carter's name took on a different meaning. A ghost hero, the man who risked everything to pull back the curtain. It didn't come without cost. David returned to his countryside home to find it reduced to smoldering ash, flames still crackling the remains of what had once been his quiet, forgettable life. His job at the warehouse had been officially terminated due to unauthorized absences, his employee file erased as though he'd never existed. Friends who'd once politely tolerated him now pretended not to know his name. In public records, David Carter had vanished. The pendant was gone, and with it, any sign of the mysterious woman. No mention of her surface in the aftermath. No body, no arrest, not even a fabricated cover story. Some claim to have seen her in distant places, shadowed alleys, or watching from crowds, though no proof ever surfaced. David could only wonder if she was alive, or she was still protecting him from whatever larger forces remained. Through the same encrypted network that had saved him before, the rogue ally reached out once more. A new identity was prepared. New papers, a different name, routes mapped through safe houses, and connections within underground resistance cells that had quietly existed for years. David no longer clung to man he used to be, the quiet loner clocking night shifts and avoiding eye contact. That life was ashes now, literally and figuratively. What remained was a man who knew too much to stay in the shadows. A man who, for the first time, chose to face the world's ugliness, however quietly, however cautiously. And though the fear remained, something else had begun to grow in its place. Resolve. Weeks later, in a city hundreds of miles away, David Carter, or the man who had once been him, moved unnoticed through crowded streets. The new identity fit like an uneasy mask, but anonymity had become his armor. The world buzzed around him, oblivious to the quiet war still simmering beneath the surface. He passed newsstands and glowing billboards, none of which spoke of classified leaks, rogue agents, or missing women. The official narrative had buried it deep. Yet in the corners of the underground, his actions lived on like whispers in the dark. A slip of paper awaited him at a dead drop, a simple, typewritten note. You did well. This isn't over. No signature. No explanation. But David didn't need one. As he pocketed the message, a distant, familiar sound reached his ears. He tilted his head skyward. Far above the towering buildings, the shape of a helicopter hovered, its silhouette barely visible against the overcast sky. For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur, faces blending, voices fading. The unease was still there, the certainty that somewhere someone was watching. But this time it didn't crush him. Instead, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He turned, melting into the moving crowd, another face in the city's restless tide. Whatever came next, David was ready. And high above, the helicopter drifted on,